This week on SNG Explains, we will look into the re-entry of Syria into the Arab fold. Next month, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad will savor an exceptional moment when Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Egypt, committed until the other day to overthrowing him, will lift the suspension on Syria's membership in the Arab League and welcome him back.
تعليق مشاركة وفد حكومة الجمهورية العربية السورية.
Syria's membership had been suspended in November 2011 following Assad's crackdown on critics and anti-government groups and the country's descent into civil war. He was accused of human rights violations, brutal state repression and corruption. But 12 years down the line, Assad continues to rule the roost in Damascus, maintaining a tight grip over his country through security and intelligence agencies. Most important of all, Assad has triumphed over his adversaries, defeating the melange of armed Islamic groups that his foes had propped up against him. From a time when he was fighting with his back to the wall in Damascus, today he sits pretty with over 60% of Syria in his grasp. Of course, the United States and other Western sanctions remain, but it's clear the mood in leading Arab capitals has changed. For one, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Salman has had enough of political Islam and wants to focus on modernizing his country and ridding it of extremism.
Countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, they were very worried about this rise of Muslim Brotherhood, which actually gained power in Egypt in 2011. Now, Muslim Brotherhood was opposed to monarchical systems. The Arab governments were very wary of them, and Bashar al-Assad was strongly anti-Muslim Brotherhood. So that became an ideological reason as well for Syria and for Saudi Arabia to find common ground after they realized that Syria can't be militarily overthrown.
He is mending fences with Iran, Assad's staunch backer. The Saudis are also working closely with Russia in managing international oil markets, and Russia is another Assad backer.
October 2011 is a turning point because till this time the regime change experiments were sort of succeeding, starting from 2003-4 with Saddam Hussein gone. Arafat of the Palestinian leader was I believe poisoned, and the investigation has never been complete. So he was out. So all the strong leaders which came out into their own in the late 70s and 80s were being toppled one by one till we come to 2011. In 2011, October, Gaddafi of Libya is toppled. I think that is a wake-up call for the others. And the next in line would have been Bashar al-Assad. But once Gaddafi was killed, that's when the Russians and the Chinese woke up. And they decided that instead of abstaining in the UN Security Council and allowing the West to go through with this agenda, they would veto any resolution for further regime change, which would have been Syria. And the reason for the Chinese and the Russians to do that was simple, because they realized that Syria would be their first defense line. Because if Bashar fell, then the next defense line would have been Iran. And if something happened to the mullahs in Iran and there was a regime change there, then this whole movement of regime change would come into Eurasia, which is their geography, their backyard, both the Chinese and the Russians. So the Americans had to be stopped.
Last month, Assad visited the UAE. He was in Oman in February this year after the earthquake. The foreign ministers of Egypt, Jordan and the UAE have trooped to Damascus to shake Assad's hand. The man reviled for the brutal human rights record of his regime is today the flavor of the Arab season.
Dominant influence of the Americans is fast disappearing, and the rise of regional powers and the capacity of Bashar al-Assad Assad to demonstrate that he's no pushover. I think these all factors essentially went in favor of Bashar al-Assad, and therefore these countries, that is especially Saudi, UAE, etc., they decided to befriend Syria. We are in a multipolar, some call it a polycentric world, but that's the way it is. And Americans are not the only game in town.
Stay tuned for more such topics on SNG Explains. Watch our episode from last week on Donald Trump's indictment on our channel. We will be back next week with a new topic. Till then, keep liking, sharing, subscribing, and of course watching StratNewsGlobal.